Almighty merciful God, as we come together to learn and discuss various parts of the world and peoples of different cultures and religion, let us approach this with respect and with impartiality, that we may understand fully what you wish to reveal to us and to understand truly what it means to be, for these people, Islamic and the history, as much as we can. We ask for charity in our hearts and love in our daily lives. We ask all this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, the easiest is just to go over the very, very basics, because if we get a bit too mired in the little bitty details, I'll be teaching a semester-long course. And so I'm going to basically give a brief overview of the religion, and then go over some origins, and then a little bit of the interpretation of those origins, and then pop into modern day. Because I'm sure most of you, first and foremost in your mind is the modern day. So we'll just kind of start with the very, very basics of Islam, which is, well, what does the word Islam mean? It means to submit. And in this case, submit to God, or Allah, which is just the Arabic word for God. We see this with all Arab-speaking Christians, Muslims, and Jews. They will refer to God as Allah. Now, who they mean by using the word Allah can be way different from what we typically would mean. For example, it was once posited in people studying from the point of view of Christianity that Allah just meant, they believe in the same exact God as we do, and they believe all the same stuff we do. You ask a Muslim, they'll tell you absolutely no. Because they would accuse Christians of worshiping a divided God, the Trinity. And although we see our Jewish brothers and sisters will see us and sometimes like, well, you got some funny ideas, but we basically believe in the same God. So there is the understanding between one another. And a lot of the times we have problems with communications of what we're talking about. Because when one person uses one language, one word, and another person uses another word for trying to get in the same ground, we kind of go in diverging directions. So that's kind of the basis of it. Now, the foundation of Islam is who is called the Prophet Muhammad. Muhammad did not come about until about the year 600 AD. And when he came about, he was not exactly he wasn't educated, he was illiterate, he was a merchant, he was a trader, as were many people in the Arab Peninsula at that time. He was in a merchant family, which is not unusual at that time, because in that period, as even we see today, they were usually groups of nomadic peoples. And they weren't all nomadic, some had little hubs and spots. For example, the cities of Mecca was one of them. We see that Nineveh, Jericho, all these places that you hear about in the Bible too, those were like trading posts. You also hear in the Bible about the sons of Ishmael, which would be, as it refers to in the Old Testament, the Arabs, or sometimes referred to as the Chaldeans, which is a little bit, our word for Chaldean now is something different than what they meant. But we see that there were nomadic people, and they roamed, and they were polytheistic. They had many gods. Some had local gods, some had a god that was common to all of the groups and tribes, but they had a large group of different types of gods. This tribe had this god, this tribe had this god, this tribe had like 5 or 6 gods. But what happened was that there was a place in Mecca, we see it today probably in pictures of the Kaaba, which is now referred as Kaaba. It was a stone house or a hut that was believed to be the first dwelling place of Adam. And then eventually it was believed that Abraham had dwelt there in that region. But since then, inside the Kaaba was row and row and row of the various gods that the different tribes had. Now, this is the type of place that he was growing up in, and he learned about. And also coming from a trading background, he encountered all the various faiths of the Middle East at that time. Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism from Persia, and the various local custom and tribal religions that still were about. He had a friend who was a Christian, but Christianity sees that Christian as quite a heretical person. That's why he was kind of off in the desert in the middle of nowhere in that world. Because there were some that were Monophysites, and various other heretical sects that were basically denying some part of what all Christians hold today, like either the Trinity, the perpetual virginity of Mary, that Christ actually rose from the dead, these various things. And if you see some of the Gnostic Gospels and some of the Gnostic writings at the time in ancient mythological almost takes of Old Testament. For example, one text has the blind and crazy angel named Abraxas creating the world. And then God had to send Christ, another God, to intervene and correct all the mess that this angel did. So this is the kind of things that you would be seeing in that time period. From crazy blind angels creating all the world, to the Old Testament God being considered evil. And there's a New Testament God now that's a brilliantly wonderful God that's really nice and kind, so the other God's gone. And you had all these things bubbling up, and all these ideas were being thrown about. You could hear them all on the tree root. Muhammad, at one point, when he went back to his hometown in Mecca, he basically had gotten fed up with the religion he was doing. He was kind of seeking. One day, while he was wandering around in a cave region, which is, he's known for kind of wandering off and kind of finding a quiet place. He was in a cave, and supposedly the angel who identified itself as Gabriel appeared to him. Recite, learn, meaning I'm about to give you the word of God. Recite and learn. And he refused him 3 times until the angel basically almost threatened to smack him upside the head and said, "Be quiet and listen and learn." And so what happened was, during that time period, is what people would, they believed that how the Quran was given. That the Archangel Gabriel dictated the Quran directly to Muhammad. And remembering he was illiterate, and he wasn't very, accounts of him from his personal friends at the time say, even, in Islamic tradition, said he wasn't exactly bright. And then several weeks and months go by, he has memorized all of this, and he commits it to writing. At the same time, when he began to preach and talk about all these things, there was a group of people who started listening to him and asking him questions, and they actually knew how to write and read. So they would, write down the sayings of the prophet, which we'll get to a little bit later. But this was kind of the beginnings of what most Muslims believe happened, and that's just kind of the basic crux of it. At one point, once all these things were coming to fruition, and Muhammad was preaching about he was the prophet of God, the final prophet of God, and you should all convert to this religion because it's the one religion. And people just, tossed him aside and heckled him, and he didn't really take kindly to that one. He was, we'll just say perturbed, to say the least. But he was exiled with a group of his followers. Eventually, they set up a place in Medina that they set up the first Muslim community. They were there practicing their religion, and then eventually what happened was that they began to run out of supplies, and God gave a revelation to Muhammad saying, you can attack these caravans and take their stuff, because you need them. And so they went and attacked these caravans, took their stuff, which sparked kind of a bigger issue with the neighboring city of Mecca, because these would be their groups coming in, bringing in supplies and what have you. And so this sparked, conflict back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Until eventually, I'm making it really short, this back and forth conflict reached a point where there were a great number of followers of Muhammad, and he vowed to take the city of Mecca, and to destroy all the idols inside the Kaaba. So he raises an army, and the people of Mecca see it coming, and they send out a negotiate a treaty, and they kind of stop in one, like a little side oasis, and kind of stay there for a month or two. And then eventually Muhammad receives another revelation from God: attack them now, get rid of the treaty. So they go out, and Muhammad tells them to take the city. They take the city. Boy, do they take the city. But when they get into the city center, which was where the Kaaba was, he proceeded to go in and have all the idols smashed and burnt. And he did some ritual purification of it. And what we see today at the Kaaba, if you would see it in pictures, it usually looks like a big box shape with a black veil over it. And nobody's really is allowed inside of it. And it's shut off, and it's just this one point where it's part of a religious ritual now to go make pilgrimage to Mecca. Now that was the kind of very, 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 very brief and short, condensed version. There's a whole lot of in there, but that's the crux of it. Now, we went over Muhammad and Allah, and so the Quran, as it says in, according to Islam, it was dictated, like I said, from Gabriel the Archangel. But once it was dictated, it was finished, and you had a book. Now, some people, when they equate the Quran, they sort of think of like Bible, like we would think of it, which is very much incorrect, because they believe that it was quite literally hand-delivered from God himself, and that to mess with it or come up with any other interpretation that's on there could be blasphemous. Now, when I speak, I'm trying to speak in general terms because there are various groups, and I'm trying to get a general overview of what most Muslims believe. And like I said, it's not what all Muslims believe, but it's a general pan-Muslim viewpoint, if I can get to that. But the Quran is considered the direct word of God from his lips.
Kind of like the Ten Commandments writ large.
Basically, yeah. And one thing about the Quran is that it can never be truly translated into another language. It has to be read in the Arabic if you're doing worship. There are translations into English, French, German, and what have you, but those are not ones that you would ever use for worship. Those are not ones that you would ever use for deep study, because if you want to know because it is a traditional belief that God speaks Arabic. And I'm not making it up. That's but I always thought he spoke language of, King James's court. He spoke perfect English. But we see this as they're taking it not just as, we would see in the Catholic point of view, we would take the Bible, look at it in its context, and then kind of, okay, what does it mean in this time period? How can we apply it to our lives? And what can we understand about God? With them, that's what it means. But there is also another set of teachings that is used in Islam, the Haditha, which would be the various interpretations from those living around at the time, and also the words of the Prophet, or what was sometimes referred to as the sayings of the Prophet, who would interpret the Quran. And so basically, that's taken as the interpretation of the Quran, period.
The catechism.
Except, it's just like, these are the words of the Prophet. If you argue, it ain't gonna be good. And again, also it depends on what type of Islam you're talking about. But we get to this point to where we have these things. You have the Quran, which can be spelled with a K or a Q, English, whatever it comes up as. And then you have the Haditha. And so you get all these various texts and instructions and interpretations and instructions that in their belief is handed down through the ages. Now,
Father, when was the Quran committed to writing?
The Quran was committed to writing about the year 630.
So about 30 years after supposedly the recitation was given originally.
Mhm. So it was being put together and put to pen, because he put it together.
Yeah.
And, but at the same time, people were writing down the words of the prophet. And they were being collected in great voluminous works, which is, I would almost, but I'm not, it's very difficult to compare it to things that we know about, because a lot of the concepts are very foreign to Western ideas and thoughts and way of approaching things, because it's kind of alien to the Western ear or to any Western concept for the most part.
Father, I read somewhere that there are 4 versions of the Quran, all written by different ones of Muhammad's sons-in-law. That is not correct?
That's a theory, and it depends on who you're talking to, which Muslim group you're talking to. Now, they may consider them interesting oddities, but there would be a single one they would use, because at a certain point, I believe in either the 1200s or the 1300s, there were, various copies that were kind of, they don't,
Mitch?
well,
They don't jibe.
they don't like to say that there were different kinds,
Yeah.
because that kind of starts to kick out of the whole thing with words from God. And various little things were kind of changed that would be very, very different interpretations, let's put it that way. For example, one of them would be, in one translation it says grapes, and the other translation that was ancient says virgins. So those kind of get a little bit mixed up. So,
There would be a great version.
so they had various copies of the ancient texts, which at a certain point they usually have what is called, they'll go through periods in history of Orthodox Islam, and then they will start doing exploring and encountering other things. And well, we have some of these other texts, and then there'll be an Orthodox uprising, and those texts are usually burnt. However, there's 1 or 2 that remain, but a group, 95% would reject absolutely that they were just kind of somebody scribbling about and just messed up when they did it. And they don't recognize them at all, because at this point, there's just one, and it's in Arabic, and it's accepted by all of Islam. However, interpretation of that is very widespread within the various sects, which I'll get to a little bit later.
There is one, the last one they were discovered, it's called the Makhtutat San'a, which it is the Quran. And, they gave 2 German scientists to determine the date and the type of choreography, because each period have different choreography in the Arabic language. And with the first 2 surahs that they interpreted, and when the sheikhs or the Muslim scholars saw it, it's completely different than what the Quran we have now. They said, stop, don't go any further. They took it, and it's secure in Yemen right now, and nobody's supposed to see it again.
Yeah, they often
And there's one in Birmingham, in London. There are 2 surahs in there, and again, they are completely different from the Quran we have right now. And, to tell you that there are so many conflicts and and I read the Quran, the Arabic, and it's completely different. I mean, you cannot translate like you said.
Yeah.
There's no way that you can have true and accurate translation to it.
Yeah, so I was saying, there were and are larger ones, but sometimes, when they don't agree with that one thought at the moment, it's like, we're gonna not talk about that one, or we're just kind of put it to the side or have it destroyed, or, okay, the person who's talking about this, you need to fall in line. And that's a little bit of the history of it. But as we kind of move on to, let's see what I got next. Okay, so we've got a brief view of the Quran, and what I also want to make emphasis is there's not really such thing as an Old Testament, New Testament with them. There are stories of things that kind of match, sort of, our Old Testament with a few stories that are in the Quran. However, it's not verbatim and it's not exact. For example, there was virgin birth, but Jesus was not a Messiah, nor was he immortal. and there are actually many ways to interpret him not being crucified, but there's quite a few interpretations because that's, people have posited different thoughts. One, what I found was interesting was that, Jesus was able to get Judas to look exactly like him, and they crucified Judas instead of him. And Jesus was able to get out of town. That was one of the more interesting ones, and which I'll maybe come back later when I have, because I want to try to get through it.
So Muhammad was the first science fiction writer.
I'm trying to be very professional. I'll get to that actually a little bit. But because some verses in the Quran are just, you look at them, it's like, holy Hannah, and people are like, oh, well, this is just like your Old Testament. It's like, well, but there's no Old and New Testament thing. I want to get ahead of myself and make sure. Because I'm trying to keep them in linear path. Okay, yeah. So we'll get to that one just a switch bit later. But anyway, just remember that there's not a concept of Old and New Testament. It's just all one book dictated by Gabriel to Muhammad. And then we have the other sayings of the Prophet, and which will equal up, certain books will equal up to what we consider Islamic law or Sharia law, and various other things. But that kind of develops and turns into something a little bit later. We have so the basic tenet of Islam is there's one God, Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet, which is, you hear from the minarets, from all over the country or all over the world. That's what they're shouting. There is one God but God. There's only one God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And we see this, and that's in lieu of bells, because they saw Christians have bells. We don't want to use bells. We want to use the human voice. So that's why you see people perched precariously up on top of those things and will just be yelling it, or they'll have a megaphone, which a lot easier. If you go to Cairo, they push a button and then it comes up a recording, which is a little bit helpful. But and they do make it very loud. When I was in Israel and in the Palestinian territories, I normally didn't hear it, but when we moved further south, when it started up, you just woke up because it was just like, you kind of flop out of bed because it's really loud, because you'll have the prominent mosque start going first, and then the second in importance will go next, and then everybody else will start kicking in. So you'll have it, and they'll just be going, and we were in the Muslim quarter at one point, and we couldn't hear each other. We just had to wait until it finished because we can't hear because it was so loud. But there were just the basic teachings, Quran, the sayings of Muhammad, and the developments that come over time, and jurisprudence and what various schools of Islam say. Okay, we have, well, for some of the basic beliefs, we'll just, the oneness of God. Obviously, Islam forbids idols, or any representation of the prophet or other prophets or human beings, but that can be variously interpreted. Because if you look at some of the ancient Islamic writings and texts and things from the further east, like the Mongolian, India, and the Indus Valley region, they actually do have pictures of people that they drew, but whenever Muhammad is depicted, there's a veil in front of his face. And again, that has to do with the various sects and the various groups in Islam. Some groups would do not do that, get rid of it. One God, do not depict Muhammad in an image above all things. And they believe, have a concept of sin. And there was 25 prophets, falling from the ones we would normally remember, like Noah, Abraham, Moses. But then Jesus is considered a prophet, and the last prophet would be Muhammad, and then that's the end. It's closed. So that's the very, very, very basic kind of rundown.
So the Quran has written in it you cannot have an image of my prophet.
Yeah,
God said that in advance.
No, that's not in the Quran.
Well,
It's-
then where
it's-
does it come from? If
it's
it's the
the
word of God
teaching.
is all that matters.
No, they also use the teaching of the prophet.
I'm sorry.
The teaching of the prophet is another book.
Okay. So,
And
so,
the Haditha, and
okay.
the interpretations of the various schools.
So they actually do believe things other than exactly what God said.
Well, the Haditha would be the interpretation of the Quran via the Prophet Muhammad as he's living at the moment, because you got the book, the Quran that was given, and then you have, as he's going around doing his business and in his life, people are writing down his sayings. And so when there's a question, they would always look at that to give information on how to interpret this.
So,
So if he says something, if he gives a reference, that's what it means.
so in other words, they believe what God said and what Muhammad said.
Exactly.
So Muhammad is placed
He's
on the same
he's
level
God.
with God.
Well, he's the mouthpiece of God.
Yes, but I mean, as far as they're concerned, Muhammad and God are the same.
They would never pray the
Same
Muhammad.
status. Well, no, they're on the same status.
It's like,
What he said.
we
God just
would
said.
think if
Oversimplification.
Yes.
he's a prophet.
I understand.
But when the words, when you're the voice of God on earth,
Like our Pope,
no, not in any way, shape, or
like our,
form.
some of our prophets,
No.
Ezekiel. That's what I'm saying. He's placed higher.
But let me move on.
I'm going to go ahead. I think I understand.
Yeah, but anyway, there's something called the 5 pillars of Islam, which are as the declaration of faith, as we talked about, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. We have the second pillar, which is salah, which is prayer, which is they pray 5 times daily, which would be the basically sunrise, midday, mid-afternoon. It's broken down into the different parts of the day, and in the middle of the night as well. And with that, there's no such, they don't treat Friday as a Sabbath as we would think concept, a Judeo-Christian thought, meaning if you rest on the Sabbath, you go to prayer, if you are able, you go to mosque for the prayers and you hear a sermon. I'm just using that so we can get it. And he would give a sermon, they would have the service, but then they'd go back to whatever they were doing that day. If they had a service, you would go back to your business or whatever. So it's not like, there's no teaching that says don't work on Friday. It just says make sure you go to mosque, go to the Friday prayers. However, that is not so for women. Women don't have to go. They can if they want to, but they have to be in a different part. In most mosques, they have to be in a different section. Then we have the third pillar, which is fasting, or I probably not pronounce it right, but Sawn, S-A-W-N, which is during the time of Ramadan. And you fast from daybreak to sundown. And so you refrain from food and water, nothing. So early in the morning, before the sun comes up, you're going to eat a really big breakfast. And when the sun goes down, you're going to have a very long meal, with various courses and stuff. And it's usually that time of year is when you kind of get together as family or community to, we don't have to fast right now, so let's eat. And so that's for an entire lunar period, because they go by a lunar calendar versus a solar calendar, and they don't adjust for solar calendar drift. And there's also what is called it can be translated in a couple of ways, but it's basically called a poor tax, a tax for the poor, or sometimes referred to as a welfare tax, which is zakat, which is for Muslims, that they would pay usually around 2.5%. It's very calculated. It can be calculated differently depending on where it is, but it's basically about that much that they would pay to the community, to a specific thing, or various other things, so like charity or what have you of their group. Which there's another tax or something later, but that's for non-believers, and we'll get to that hopefully in a minute. There's also called, the fifth pillar is the pilgrimage, the Hajj, where you see people going from, to Mecca, Medina, and various places in between. I won't go into the great details, but we've all seen the pictures of the Kaaba and people circling the Kaaba in prayer. Now at the point when you get there, you try to get there at least one time in your lifetime, if you can. But if you're, frail and you can't get, or if you just don't have the money. But it's expected that a Muslim male would get there at least once in his lifetime. There are many who save up their entire lives and probably get there by the time they're 65 or something, and be able to do the Hajj. There are many intricate rituals involved, but again, I won't go too terribly much into detail because I'm trying to chug this thing along a little bit. And those would be the five pillars of Islam, the basics.
Would you go over them one at a time? First of all, the declaration. Then the second one is the
Prayer,
prayer. The third one is the
fasting.
the fasting, then almsgiving, and then the Hajj.
Mhm.
Okay.
But the giving, the zadaq is,
Well, I said almsgiving is a general term.
yeah,
but
just give for help.
it's a little more formal than that.
Yeah.
It should have bingo, they wouldn't have it.
I keep coming back to the grapes and the virgins. Imagine you go blow yourself up and you go to paradise and you have 72 grapes.
We actually had that discussion in class, in one of my in religion courses in MTSU. We were kind of like, yeah, that'd be kind of a great disappointment.
Real letdown.
Here's your 70 some grapes.
I'll make some wine, heck.
So if we want, actually, let's see. We can, what time we got? If we want to take a 5-minute break, that's okay? Is that okay?
If you want to, yeah.
You want to keep going?
Yeah, sure, keep going.
Okay.
Unless you need it.
No, I was just, throwing it out there because I'm trying to keep myself on time too.
Father, are you going to cover any, what I would refer to as the holy men? I'd like to know what their function or duties. like
Okay,
this.
yes, I am.
Okay, the Ayatollahs. Who-
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. And basically, let me get my little chart. I got my little chart here. I'm going to do basically the breakdown of the various, for lack of a better term, denomination, and I'm using that in an incredibly loose term. There's more than that. Great big more than that. Okay, we have, after the death of Muhammad, there was a one understanding that his brother-in-law was placed as head, which no one had any problem with that at first. And then once he went, then everything started to split more. There was one group who wanted it to be almost not necessarily voting in a way, but a sort of an election, not, it's the best way you can put it, of who will be the, basically the teacher, who would be the guide, the spiritual guide for the people. And they were divided. One would be that they wanted to kind of vote for it. Others would be, no, it has to be within the family of Muhammad, and in relation, because in their belief it was a divine knowledge kind of handed down. And so they would be more in touch with the Prophet because we'd be in the same bloodlines. And that actually even gets more split up. But those were kind of the basic two.
That's basically succession you're talking.
Exactly. And also leads in how we would interpret the teachings. Because the Shia leadership would be more of, my brain's dying, would be the hereditary, okay, this was the brother-in-law of so-and-so, this was related to, and some would even go through the wife of Muhammad's family.
Which one?
The first one.
The old one.
And so it would kind of get brought into that. And then you would have the Sunni, which would be the religious leaders, the caliphs, are chosen by the people or a group of religious elders who knew the faith and would pray about it and then kind of come to a conclusion. So that's two major ones. And then under that, they just kind of like spread out like a gigantic root system. So 80% of Muslims are Sunni, okay? Sunni are the ones that are basically chosen. The Shia, focusing on tradition is handed on by bloodline, are a small minority, which is basically what that means. Sunni means the minority. And Shia means partisans, meaning that they would just kind of choose along the way. Now, just to kind of, okay, so you have the majority of the Muslim world as Sunni, and then you have a small amount that are Shia. So you have the hereditary based, which actually most of Iran, which is a minority in Iraq, but with a large minority, I should say. And then each country, as we see today, has either Sunni or Shia and their various bring downs. And so they've not getting too terribly much into modern stuff, which I will get to, but trying to keep me on a linear path here. They conflict, because at one point one assassinates a leader that was like the brother-in-law, or I believe it was the brother-in-law of Mohammed, assassinated him, and so it caused conflict, and then this went to the other, so then you're kind of breaking off into the various things. But as I go down the list here, under the Sunni branch, we have, which I apologize because I am, transliteration is not really great from Arabic to English, so the Malak, which were basically formed in the 8th century, very traditionally Arabic, and most dominant Muslims in Africa. So the Malak, M-A-L-I-K-I. And in that same branch, you would find the Sharif, S-H-A-F-I, which you would call the liberalized form, in quotation marks, of the Maliki, I guess you could say. I'm just, whatever comes out of it. You may hear a different pronunciation, that probably is the better one, but I'm just, as a go
Father,
along.
is there one basic concept that